Can anybody explain what happened to me? I'm 27 years old, female, and I love being outside. The woods is where I feel at home. I've been camping out alone in the woods several times, and I'm an avid outdoors woman. Now, on to my story. It's summer 2018. The temperature was high, and I just needed to be outside. I was going to camp out in the forest. I've only been to one time before. It's beautiful, and there are a lot of places that people never go. I've heard about this pretty waterfall that I was going to try to find. The maps are a bit unclear, and I couldn't find much about the location, but I was going to try to find it. It was Friday, and I'd packed all my gear. I had my tent packed, but I thought maybe I'd sleep out under the sky. Of course, it could be hot, so sleeping inside a tent wouldn't be so great anyway. It was 8 a.m., and I'd arrived at the parking lot. I parked my car and started to unload my stuff. I suddenly got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. I acted like nothing was wrong, and then I turned around really fast to see if someone was watching me. To my surprise, there was no one. I was all alone. So I started to listen, and I thought I heard a sound. My breathing was fast. Why do I suddenly feel so scared? I've never been scared. I've done this so many times. What could possibly be the reason for me to feel like this? I shrugged and turned around to collect the rest of my things. I started walking down the path while I looked at the map. I noticed that the map was a little old, so maybe it's a bit different now. I'd bought a new map, but I must have packed the old one instead. Well, I'd find this waterfall no matter what. After about an hour of walking, I found a little path. It was barely there, but I could see it. I started following it, and there's a lot of obstacles blocking the way, but I managed to navigate through them. Another hour, and I heard the sound of a waterfall. I began to smile. I was close now. Shortly after I found the waterfall, I was in awe of how magical it was. Is this even real? I took some pictures, and I started to set my camp up. I'm not setting the tent up. I'm going to sleep under the open sky. I had a lot of canned food with me, because the forest is so dry in the summer, so starting a fire is dangerous. I looked through my things and realized I forgot my gun. I only have my hunting knife. Darn, I wish I hadn't forgot it at home. I spent the rest of the day at the waterfall, and I didn't see or hear anyone. I was utterly alone the whole time. As the sky got darker, I started getting ready for bed. Tomorrow was a new day, and I was going to hike the area. The day passes fast, and soon it was night. I lay on my sleeping pad, and just as I'm falling asleep, I heard something. I didn't know what it was, but it makes my heart start pounding. I get this feeling of being watched again. I find my flashlight and start looking around. I look at my phone, but I have no service. I start to panic. I turned my flashlight off and started to listen. There's no sound. None at all. It's just so quiet. I've never heard a forest so silent. Then I hear a branch crack suddenly. Then silence again. I get my knife and I listen intensely, and then I hear it again. A branch breaking. Something's close, and it's sneaking closer. The only thing I can hear are my heartbeat and my breath. I sit there listening for several minutes, but nothing happens. An hour later, I haven't heard anything. I'm scared. My heart's beating so fast, but after some time, I managed to fall asleep. I wanted to set the tent up, but it was so dark, and I didn't have time for it now. 3:33 a.m., I wake up again, bathed in sweat, and once again I feel like I'm being watched. I start fumbling around for my flashlight, but I can't find it. I panicked, but then I found it. It's 20 inches away from me, but how did it get that far away? I turned the light on and looked around, and then I realized my knife was gone. I shone the light around on the ground. I see something. I look closer, but what is that? My body freezes. Right there, it's a message written in the dirt. The words, "I see you, but you can't see me." I just stare at it, thinking something was here. While I slept, something was this close to me, and now I don't have anything to protect myself with. Then I hear it again in the distance. Someone's whistling and humming. Then it stops, and it's replaced with hysterical laughter. My body's shaking. Someone's mocking me, and they have my knife. I'm sweating so much, but I feel so cold. I start to think about my family. What would they think if I never came home? Are they ever going to find me if this thing kills me? Do I regret anything? Why did I go into this forest when I'd already felt something in the parking lot? Why didn't I listen to my gut? My body was trying to warn me, and I was so stupid. My thoughts kept running through my head. I see my life passing before my eyes, but then I feel a high in my body. It's rising through my body, and suddenly, I want to run. If this thing's going to kill me, I'm not going to go out without a fight. I stood up and just started running. I'm falling over things onto the ground, but I just keep running. The laughing comes closer, and I can hear it as I'm being followed by someone or something. I hit my head, I scrape my legs. They hurt, but I just keep running. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm praying that I get out alive. It's only a few feet behind me now. It's getting closer. Every second that passes by, I'm crying, and I keep thinking about my family. I don't want to leave them behind. It's going to reach me any second now. It's so close I can hear its breath. It's not laughing anymore. It's just breathing, heavy and slow, like it's not hard at all. If it wanted, it could just take me right now. But it doesn't touch me. It's right behind me, and I'm just running for my life. And then I tripped, and I fell on the ground. And as long as I was there, no more than a few seconds, I knew it was over. I was not going to survive this. I turned around and looked up, shining my light over my head, and I could feel the breath on my cheek, but I couldn't see anything. Then I hear a whistling right above my head. I can smell it. I'm gagging, and I'm crying, and I'm begging for my life. Then I blacked out. When I opened my eyes, the sun was rising. I'm bleeding from my legs and my head, but I was alive. I looked around, and I was alone, but I can hear a car. I must be close to the parking lot. I got up and started following the sound of the car. When I got to the road, I could see it coming towards me, and I flagged it down. It's a kind woman, and she stopped her car and asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak. I'm just crying, and then she asks me, "Are you Maria?" I look at her and just nod. How did she know my name? She asked if I was aware that I'd been missing for 7 days. I looked at her, confused. How can I have been missing for 7 days? I've only been in the woods since yesterday. She calls someone, and a police car comes, an ambulance too, and I'm put into the ambulance. I'm still not able to speak. They drive me to the hospital, but I'm physically okay. My dad walks in crying, and he's so happy to see me alive. This is real. I can't remember the last 6 days. What happened to me? How am I still alive? What did it do to me? I never got back to collect my things, and I never got an answer on what had happened that night. I'm never going into the forest again. I don't want to play with my second chance at life. Rule 6. Should any patron hear a strange growling noise from any arcade cabinet, let them know immediately that you'll take care of it, and get a kit from underneath the manager's desk and place it behind the game in question. This incident I'll tell you about happened nearly 5 months into the job. It happened about 5 or 6 times a month. Some kid was complaining about hearing a low growling from the Frogger machine. There are kits for each arcade underneath the manager's desk, supposedly containing different foods for different monsters inside the cabinets. They said that they heard the growling after they completed about 5 levels, and it distracted them so much that they ended up failing into a game over. Don't worry, kid, I'll take care of the problem. I rushed to the manager's office and asked if I could get something from beneath his desk. Rule 6 stand forth, he asked. Yes, Rule 6. Which arcade? Frogger. Hang on. I waited for about half an hour outside the manager's office. I was bored, so I was about to leave when he came out with the necessary kit. Here, remember to place it directly under the arcade cabinet. I rushed over to the Frogger cabinet and quickly put the kit underneath the cabinet. Almost immediately, I thought I saw tentacles just kind of take the kit. I'll admit, it scared me so bad that I jumped, and one of the kids asked if I was okay. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for your concern. Rule 7. If a strange woman's face suddenly shows up at the game where you throw balls at the bottles, close it off until the face is gone. I had the drive to follow this rule after I saw what happened when a patron actually played it when the face was present. The face looked a lot like Olivia Newton-John's from that movie Grease. My getting distracted caused what happened next. I saw the guy start to play. He threw 2 balls without incident. The face showed up right after he threw the third one to topple the third set of plastic bottles. The ball hit the face, and if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd have never believed it. The face showed a lot of anger. It stuck its tongue out, then opened its mouth wide. The man could hardly believe his eyes. He looked scared. Luckily, no one else was near the game, which was good because no one else had to watch that face slide up out of the game and eat the man whole. I stood there in shock for a minute. I noted the identity of the patron and closed off the game. We do this by adding a sign and some yellow tape that says it's under repair. Then I went to the manager immediately. I told him everything. Danforth, that face tends to show up when you least expect it. It's very rare that the face would show up right as the game is being played. You were supposed to tell him to wait between throws in case the face showed up. I blinked. I did. He even complied. Okay. That face showed up just as he threw the ball. Meaning that either the timing was bad, or that thing's getting smarter. I'll look into the incident. For now, close the game off for the rest of the day. And that was just what I did. The face usually goes away after an hour of the game being closed, but it takes a little longer if it gets someone. Could be why he wanted me to close it off for the rest of the day, I guess. Rule number 8. If a brunette shows up in a black dress with a facial tattoo of a spider web and walks through as if she's floating, notify the manager immediately. This one happened about 6 months into the job. I was making my rounds after hours, making sure to keep following the rules. The patrons were just leaving when I saw the brunette walk in. It took me a while to notice her face. Yeah, she was wearing a black dress. She did walk like she was floating. She was super tall, as though she might be over 8 feet. I was about to dismiss her as a patron coming for a prize when I noticed the unmistakable tattoo of a spider web around her right eye. After 6 months of noticing what happened when you break the rules, how could I not rush to the manager's office on instinct? Boss, we got a Rule 8. I see. Bring her to me, Danforth. This might take a while, so just wait outside till I'm done. I had a strong feeling that he might have met her before. I looked all over for this girl. Yeah, she was beautiful. Yeah, she was tall, but for some reason she kind of blended in. I finally found her by the Pac-Man machine, and I took her straight to the manager's office. When I asked her to come with me, though, she turned around and she looked scared to death. I told her it was okay, and I brought her to the manager's office. The door closed as she went inside, and I just waited there until he was done. He was right, it certainly took a while. Boredom started setting in, and the arcade machines turning on and off was getting annoying. After a while, the brunette walked out, seemingly calm, and left the arcade. The manager's eyes appeared bloodshot, and I asked him what had been going on. Can't tell you. But were the arcade screens acting strange? They were turning on and off over and over. He paused for a moment. He looked at the arcade screens and saw they were still doing it. Danforth? Yeah, boss. It's time. We have to break Rule 9 tomorrow. Rule 9. Do not play the nameless arcade game that randomly shows up in every corner of the arcade. The cabinet in question has no name at all. Almost every day, it just randomly shows up in another corner. The arcade screens have different ways of acting if the brunette shows up, he told me. If they were showing weird images and cycling, it meant that there was nothing wrong. If they were showing the image of that girl while the brunette was there, then he had to let her talk to the brunette. But if they were flashing like that, like they had the day before, then we'd have to break Rule 9. The next day, the nameless arcade machine showed up near the entrance. It was almost like muscle memory for me to try to put the out of order sign on it, but the manager just waved me off. I need to do this, to keep the business going and to protect everyone. I was looking over his shoulder, studying the game that I had so often ignored. A new name, Lester Harrison, showed up in the left corner, a name that turned out to be the manager's, though I didn't know it at the time. The name of the game was No Heart, No Soul, just as it had been for the other kids who had died playing it. I heard that in this nameless arcade game, the avatar was consistent, unlike the Rule 1 cabinet. In it, the avatar looked like a rich man with a disfigured face. My boss got the man to the right of the arcade game, and the man talked to what appeared to be a zombified blend of a biker punk chick and the disguise that the 2 FBI characters wore in White Chicks. They seemed to talk in an unintelligible language, a mix of Spanish and Irish, I think. Then the screen changed to black, with the white text that said, "Please choose a new manager." Then the manager said, "I already did. He's my best employee, and I think he's fit for the job." Then the text changed again. Danforth Crab? Indeed, he is eligible. Then, the game changed. It changed into the ones described in Rule 1. It changed into one of those EXE ones that we weren't supposed to play. The ones that had led to the death of those two kids. In this case, it was the avatar in a burning version of Green Hill Zone of Sonic the Hedgehog. Then the manager went catatonic, his skin paler than I'd ever seen it. I decided to move his body off, and then the text read, "Now that you have taken the managerial duties of this place, please move the character to the goal. He would have wanted you to manage the arcade and protect everyone." When I did as it asked, I noticed the name on the corner changed into mine. So I played it to bring the avatar to the goal. I was scared, even when I managed to get it playing. Scared because the manager died right then and there, before the game had ever even been completed. I was mentally scarred by the experience of following and seeing the effects of breaking each rule, but I had to do it. It took a while, but when I finally got him to the goal, I was relieved. Then the game's text switched again. "You've passed the test. I assure you that you will do what you can to save us all. Remember to read the manuals on the desk so that you can fulfill your job. Goodbye." Then the arcade turned itself off. I went to Lester Harrison's office, now my office, I suppose, and looked into the manuals. I was scared because I'd never taken such a job before. Also, having witnessed his death, a death that was shared by Gabriel and Natalie, had scared me. The manual was leather-bound, had the rules, the reasons why, and instructions on how employees must be trained. On the last page it said, "Rule 10, the establishment must always have a manager." This all happened before COVID-19. I think it was 2016, maybe. Started working at the arcade some years before it all happened. I had a run-in with the manager and all that. When I got hired, however, the manager made us all, the new employees of the arcade, memorize some specific rules. These were unusual, since we were working in an arcade with things like Pac-Man and Frogger and Donkey Kong, but you get the idea. Rule 1. If a new arcade game shows up either by the name of No Heart, No Soul, or with an EXE at the end of the title, do not play it, or ever let a patron play it at any cost. This was the one rule that I almost broke. When I had to memorize the rules, my first thought was, that's the most ridiculous set of rules I've ever seen. After what has gone on, how could I not think they were serious? Originally, rule number 1 just had "with EXE" on the end of the title, but the part about No Heart, No Soul was added after the death of a 10-year-old non-binary kid named Gabrielle Myers and a 14-year-old girl named Natalie Schmaltz. It happened as a result of playing the game. According to the account of the manager, a former employee named Thomas Ferrari allowed the games to be played. The kids played the game, it displayed a creepy message, and it added a creepy character with the player's name, which was uncanny to say the least, since the arcade game shouldn't even have the player's name already if it isn't entered. Both kids had talked to a character in-game that looks like a mixture between a female pirate and a biker punk. They then had to complete a strange, difficult challenge. They couldn't complete them, resulting in the screen showing a message saying "Game over, may the next victim play." Both of them went pale and catatonic after that, as if the game had stolen their souls. Another former employee named Marky Harrison recounted that the game had shown up in another arcade under a different name. Now I'm going to tell you about when I almost broke the rules. No, this did not involve No Heart, No Soul. The arcade had just opened for business, with Galaga, Mrs. Pac-Man, a vehicle arcade, a Batman, a dance machine, you name it. I was cleaning up before work when I noticed a new arcade game had been plugged in. It was Donkey Kong EXE. I at first shrugged it off, thinking it was a bootleg Donkey Kong arcade. But the rules, I snapped out of it and realized the rules applied here. I remembered Rule 1 and remembered thinking it was ridiculous. I went and let the arcade open, ready for patrons to play. But the kids immediately noticed the new Donkey Kong game, and they all gathered around it out of sheer interest, almost as if they had become zealots of a deity of sorts. "Mr. Crab," one of the kids asked, "can I play this?" They were pointing at the Donkey Kong EXE. I was about to let her play it when the manager showed up out of nowhere. He came to me so fast I swear he didn't even touch the ground. "Rule 1, Danforth." But I can't disappoint these kids," I said, as if I'd allowed this monster to do its thing. "Whatever you do, do not, under any circumstances, let anyone play this game. That includes you. It has not succeeded in finding another victim in 6 months, and I will not let it happen again. Later, after the arcade closed, the game was unplugged, hauled off, and taken away. No child played that game that day. Rule 2. If no person comes out of the laser tag arena for 30 minutes after they enter, notify the management immediately. After my run-in with the manager after nearly letting the girl play the game, how could I not follow the rules? This happened about a month after the Donkey Kong EXE incident. As a general rule, we have to observe the time of the next group of people to play laser tag. We also have employees keeping watch on the laser tag in case Rule 2. Normally, a period of laser tag lasts 20 minutes, so we're usually good at that. I had the shift that day. I watched the people go in, so I wrote down the time they went in. I know, we get bored with all these kinds of things, but how can we not get bored when we just have to watch the entrance of a laser tag arena? The time was 2:37 p.m. when the group went in. I watched the entrance, glancing at my watch to make sure the laser tag game lasted 20 minutes and no longer. My coworker Miles ghosted up to me, as she always did. "Danforth, how you doing?" "Miles, don't you dare sneak up on me like that. I need to make sure this laser tag game goes smoothly." "Oh, that's what you have to do today." "Okay." She went back to her janitorial duties, and by then I glanced at my watch. 3:05. I dashed straight for the manager's office, after having noticed that nobody had come out of the laser tag arena. After my run-in with rule number 1, how could I not? I burst through the door, and I said in a volume that was almost like shouting, "Rule 2, time was 2:37 p.m., 12 people inside." The manager got out of his chair so fast that I thought he was about to run for his life. "Ah, crap! Move aside! I knew this was going to happen again. I knew it! He grabbed a screwdriver and a wrench from his desk drawer and rushed towards the laser tag arena. He opened the circuit breaker inside and did some things that would require the skill of a mechanic. About 5 minutes later, I saw the people I had seen enter come out the exit. All 12, no worse the wear. Later that day, I asked the manager about what happened, which prompted him to make this rule. It turned out that some residents of the small town had gone missing after something had happened in the laser tag arena. He showed me the missing posters, even showed me some of the paperwork with notes from previous employees, about the time they had gone in, and how 30 minutes had passed with no one coming out. I realized that what he had done was a type of procedure that stopped the monster within the laser tag game. He discovered it in some kind of manual. I realized from his reaction to my notifying him of rule number 2 that the rules weren't out of silliness. They were there to protect us. Rule number 3, if a blonde woman in a red dress asks for a prize, under no circumstances should you give any of them to her. This happened to me for the first time about a month into my job. I was given the shift of the prize counter that day. Note to you guys, we change jobs weekly to make sure everyone doesn't get burned out, and, to protect us from the weirdness that goes on around here. Like I said, I was working the prize counter. There were some interesting things, like the toy balls and the Nerf guns that you couldn't find anywhere else, but they were mostly all plush animals. Luckily, the woman in the red dress can take no for an answer, making her one of the least dangerous things on the job in the arcade. I got about 7 tickets from this kid, and he asked me for that unicorn. I gave him the one he wanted, but in the line was the blonde woman in the red dress, just behind the kid who wanted the unicorn. She looked like her hair was really bleached white. Her dress was like a red-colored version of a Monica Black dress in the TV show. Her figure was awfully attractive and a little creepy. She came up to me and asked, "May I have one of those plastic pirate swords?" She offered me the 5 tickets that it would take to get it, and I offered it to her, but the thing I found out about the ticket was that there were no numbers on them like there normally would be. So I said no, and she just smiled and walked out of the arcade. I went to the manager to find out more about this rule. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second? Danforth, you gonna tell me you broke a rule?" "No, I need to know more about rule number 3. With that, he gave me a stack of papers. When the arcade closed that night, I read through most of them, the headlines jumping off the page at me. Family murdered in their home, an article from a 1985 paper. The article talked about an employee of the arcade offering a woman in a red dress a prize the night before they were killed. That night, he and his whole family had been murdered. Engaged couple killed. That had been an article from 1987. The wife was working at the arcade when she offered a prize to a woman in a red dress, right before the night they were murdered. I could see some handwriting, but it was hard to read. "It's the same lady," someone had scrawled in the margins. Several other articles read about someone offering a prize to a blonde lady in a red dress, right before their death or the deaths of their families. When I got to the last page, it was just more handwriting. I better make a rule to avoid this in the future. Rule 4. If there is ever a power outage in the after hours, hold still. If an arcade turns on by itself during the said outage, go straight to it and play the game until the power comes back on. Make sure that when you play the game under that circumstance, to make no mistakes whatsoever. Normally, we're not supposed to play games on the job, but if the circumstance for this rule happens, that is where you can get an exception. Since we switch jobs weekly, I sometimes have janitorial duties after hours. 2 weeks into the job, I had janitor duty in the after hours and the power went out. That includes the obligatory emergency lights that are supposed to stay on regardless. I stood completely still, thinking the power outage would be temporary, but an arcade cabinet came on, turned on by itself with a startup screen, and the number of credits needed to play already in it. It was that game with the hamster wheel, the one that kids love so much. You have to roll the ball through the course without fail, and at the end you get some tickets. Remembering the rule, I walked right up to it and started playing. It didn't play like it usually did, and it was as if the difficulty had been turned way up. It was hard not to let the wheel fall off. I kept on playing, just trying to keep him from falling off the track. I sat there playing that game for 4 hours until the power came back on, and when it did, I went straight to management. I saw you playing that game. Rule 4, Rule 9, or were you just slacking off? Rule 4, boss. Good. Keep in mind, Danforth, if Rule 4 should happen again, making any mistake will do to you what happened to Gabrielle and Natalie. I remembered those 2 girls laying pale and catatonic in front of that machine, and made a mental note never to fail at a game if it happened again. Rule number 5. If all the arcade screens show the exact same message, notify the management immediately. I had janitorial duty, but sometimes I work the prize counter, and sometimes I also work the laser tag to make sure that it works properly. I had janitorial duties that night, but sometimes I had to work the prize counter, and sometimes I also had to watch over the laser tag to make sure that rule number 2 never went down. I'd been working for 3 months when the arcade games suddenly blinked on after hours, and all the games had the same screen. They all showed the exact same image, the image that was a mixture of biker chick and Disney princess of some form. I remember cleaning up the last of the mess I was on super quick and going straight to the manager. Rule 5. Okay, Danforth, stay here. I'll take care of it. He rushed straight to the arcade game with the biggest screen, which was in the corner. He stood straight-faced in front of the screen and asked whatever the girl was on the screen, "All right, what do you want this time?" The image on all the screens turned to look at him, and they spoke like multiple girls talking to him at once. "You know what I want. Cut the crap, lady. Tell me what you want. You made the rules against it, remember? You know the games are hungry. Not after those 2 girls. Never again. Rules are meant to be broken, Lester. You know what I want. Like I'd ever believe anything you say again. You think you can just make rules against the creature I am? When I need more what? You know what I want. No way I'm letting you kill more kids. Don't you remember? I want someone to play no heart, no soul. The hell with that. Please. When won't you let this cute little man play it, too? No chance. You'll pay for this. Rule number 1's there for a reason." There was silence for a moment. Then she said, "You've given me what I want. All I really wanted was for you to remember the fear you had when I took those souls." "You bitch," the manager said. Then the arcade screens turned off. No other incident happened that day. I remember being pretty scared. Seems as if the arcades are possessed by some strange monsters. It felt as if we were dealing with some sort of demon. All I could do was watch helplessly, really having no way to deal with any of this. I was recently recruited for the U.S. government, and today I'm preparing for my first case. We're investigating a company called Rion Global, as reports have been surfacing that they're performing unauthorized and illegal genetic enhancements on animals whose meat they mean to sell. From that introduction, you may assume I work for the FDA, maybe the CDC. Both assumptions are dead wrong, though. I work for the FBI. My name's Dexter Watson, and to be more specific, I work for the supernatural branch of the FBI. And yes, before you say it, I'm well aware that such a branch doesn't exist. We, as opposed to one of those other, more mundane organizations, were called in because these genetic enhancements may have crossed over what we call the Clarkson threshold. I'm not sure when we call it that. I'm still pretty new here, but It describes the invisible line separating the things the public knows from the things we prevent the public from knowing. The FDA, the CDC, they're below the Clarkson threshold. As I said, I'm still pretty new here, though. I was a junior in college last year when they recruited me. I was at Penn State on a football scholarship, the only way I could afford to attend college, and they had been putting me through a few tests that I didn't actually know were tests when they were happening, which was rather frightening to say the least. Regardless, I passed them all, and I was informed of my passing by an unmarked envelope. Also included in that letter was an offer. Meet them at a disclosed location for a job offer. It was as simple as that. There was no figure given, no description either. The only information at all was provided at the bottom, and it was a modified version of the FBI logo. It was like the normal logo, all except the red and white striped insignia on the front, where normally it's just blank. On this version, there are two things in front of it. There was a sort of oblong ovular shape running diagonally, and crossed with it was a large rectangle, with various sections of it jutting out to give it kind of a clunky look. No one's told me what either of them represent as of yet. If I'm being honest, I'm not really sure why I took the job. Maybe it was because I was tired of doing nothing with my life. Maybe it was the allure of a high-paying job with security. Or, hell, maybe it was because I wanted to help people. Whatever the reason, I met them at the location, and after hearing the details of the job, I accepted. 3 weeks of vigorous training and briefing later, I'm here, 2 days away from my first mission. It's a routine one to be sure, as while genetic enhancement sounds exciting and dangerous, they hardly ever turn out to be, at least so I'm told. They say we usually catch on to them before they get out of hand, as genetic engineering leaves a pretty obvious energy signature, at least when one knows where to look. I've been partnered with Scarlett Gill on this one, an agent who joined right around the same time I did, and as a result, we were together through the majority of our training. We spent quite a bit of time together as a result, but very little time is allowed for personal talk during the 3 introductory weeks. We're working out, drilling, joking together, and we'd even come to like each other a little, but neither of us has been allowed to know a thing about the other's personal life until the training was complete. We're together now, Scarlett and I, as we pass the night before the job. She's certainly nice and enjoyable enough to be around, but more importantly, she's loyal. The FBI seems to enjoy making us believe we're in life-threatening scenarios when, in fact, it's merely another drill, something we enjoy significantly less. But every time they have, Scarlett's had my back. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, noticing my introspective attitude and raising an eyebrow at me. "Afraid you wouldn't be getting your money's worth. It's just a little weird. These past 3 weeks have been kind of a whirlwind, and the most boring thing we've done is find out about this assignment." "I'm still holding out hope we're going to run into some kind of mutant chicken or something," she joked. "Maybe even a man-eating cow." Are we really lowering our standards for excitement to man-eating cows? I mean, even I wasn't that pessimistic. "Whatever," she said, rolling her eyes and leaning back in her chair. "I'm just ready to get out of this place, to see some people again. Maybe the CEO will be some cute single guy who just needs the right girl to get him back on track. Maybe I'll meet the man of my dreams on this mission." "Don't get your hopes up," I teased. "I mean, it's Maine. You can't expect Ben Affleck." "Oh," she asked, "and I assume that Jennifer Lopez is just waiting for you, right?" "Something like that," I said, nodding and laughing. We both joked, sharing some pre-mission banter, but in reality, there would be no matchmaking during this mission, and we both knew it. We would be arriving unannounced, and there was no telling how anyone at the company would react. Sure, it was just your average check-in to keep them honest, but what if they panicked? It wouldn't be the least unlikely thing that would happen. As the laughter trailed off into silence, Scarlett finally said, We should probably get some sleep. It's a long drive to Maine." "Sure is," I agreed. Both of us being rookies on a routine mission, we hadn't been deemed important enough to garner a full flight. So, we were stuck driving one of the old clunky SUVs the Bureau kept, to the best of my knowledge, for the sole purpose of hazing. So, yawning a bit, I bid her good night, and we retreated to our respective bunks for the evening. March 20th. I'm not usually prone to nightmares, but I had one last night. I was in a forest, I think, and a faceless man stood in front of me. Behind him and to his left was a wild horse, bucking and neighing loudly. It was surrounded by thorns, and every time it reared back on its hind legs, it came down, impaling itself on them. To the right was Scarlett, bound at her hands and feet. I didn't know what was going on. I tried to ask him, but I found that I was frozen in place, unable to move or do anything as the faceless man looked down at me tauntingly. I woke up in a cold sweat an hour before my alarm set off, so I quietly showered, got dressed, and walked outside, allowing the brisk morning air to fill my lungs. It was always calming being out this early. It put it all in perspective. The assignment was just an assignment. My dream had just been a dream. The base we were at was tucked away in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, by far the most beautiful place I'd ever seen in my life. As the sun rose in the east, I leaned on a railing overlooking an immense horizon. Mountains dropped off beneath me, only to pick up in the forest that spread out below me. After what must have been miles of forest, the first rays that would eventually become the blazing ball of light that was the sun peeked out at me. I took a deep breath, then exhaled. I always wondered why they wasted such a great view on a military base. A voice from behind me surprised me, causing me to jump. I turned around and found Carmen Clay, my direct supervisor, who coincidentally had been promoted to her post at around the same time Scarlett and I arrived. She walked over to the railing and leaned on it as well, looking out across the horizon. So much natural beauty. Contrast is the stark coldness of the Bureau. It's two different worlds. I cleared my throat and agreed with her. She looked at me for a moment. You have something that not a lot of people do, you know. You know how to talk yourself off a ledge, and that'll get you a long way in this department. Thank you, ma'am. She gazed down at the forest for another moment before continuing. A wise man once told me that for every one thing that goes right on a mission, 10 things are bound to go wrong by the time you're finished celebrating. Remember that. I let her words sink in as she returned to the main compound. At first, it just seemed like she was getting in on the fun of piling on the new guy, but that didn't at all fit with what I knew about her. There was more to what she was saying than just to poke fun at me. Scarlett was awake a half hour later, and a briefing followed not long after. The briefing was relatively short. We already knew most of the details. It was just some general information that hadn't been covered yet. Then we were off, just like that. There was no send-off, no hearty goodbyes. The briefing ended, and we were on our way. It was a 3-hour drive to the Rion headquarters in Old Town, Maine, and I drove the first half, with Scarlett picking up the back end. The conversation remained light while it was alive, which wasn't the majority of the ride. But still, there was general optimism, and I could feel it as we drove. First, we passed the sign informing us we'd entered Maine, a milestone achievement very early on in the journey. Then we passed through Bethel, then Skowhegan, then Bangor, and finally, we saw the signs for Old Town. Our massive, bulky SUV stood out in the small town, even as we neared the center of industry that was Rion headquarters. All the vehicles up here were small, either tiny sedans or, for the more wealthy people, little convertibles or sports cars. We towered over almost everything, and word spread fast in a town like this. People wondered why we were here, and they weren't shy about asking. We drew some stares, and the closer we got to our destination, the more people I saw take out their phones and dial a number when they saw us. When the third person did so, I pointed it out to Scarlett. Someone's getting advance notice that we're on our way, I told her, gesturing back to the man on the phone. They're a tight-knit community here, so much for the element of surprise. Not a great sign, she said with a nod. If they've got people out to let them know when someone is coming, they've probably got something to hide. With that, we came into view of the massive, sprawling complex. Rion headquarters was a sight to behold. The main entrance dominated by a huge statue of the company's logo in the middle of a U-shaped driveway. The front of the building was a large glass room, but at the height the sun was in the sky, we couldn't see into it yet. The glass rose up to more than 2 stories high, then dipped back down before turning into cement and rising up into the offices in the first level. It was only 6 stories high, but its size came in its width. We had just reached the far edge of the building, and we still had nearly a quarter mile to go to reach the entrance. The headquarters seemed big enough to be its own city. Why would anyone need this much space? Scarlett murmured, echoing my thoughts. As she approached the driveway, she asked, "Do we just park here? I don't see a lot or anything. We've got government plates. It's not like they're going to tow us. But that's definitely weird," I concurred. She pulled into the driveway behind the fountain, parking the car in front of the front doors. There was a surprising lack of activity as we approached the glass doors. Ours was the only car in the long driveway, and as we approached, we seemed to be the only people making our way into the building. As we entered, we saw that it was empty, save for the receptionist at the desk. I glanced curiously at Scarlett, as no greeting came from her, and we slowly let the doors close behind us. "Hello, ma'am," Scarlett said, her voice echoing around the silent lobby. "We're here with the FBI. We'd like to take a look around." There was no response. It was a large lobby, and it took us some time to get closer after several more unsuccessful attempts at communication. Our footsteps on the tiles filled the otherwise empty room as we made our way towards the desk, and then, as details became clearer, it was obvious that something was off. The receptionist had a blank look on her face. She wasn't asleep, yet still she didn't reply. We hadn't noticed until we got far enough away from the front windows, but the lights were out. We both felt the oddness of the situation, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Scarlett's hand drift to the butt of her pistol, preparing to draw it at any moment. I did the same. When we arrived at the desk, she still hadn't reacted to us. Something was definitely off. Wordlessly, I moved my hand in front of her eyes for a moment. Nothing. Then I held the backs of my hand up to her nose. I glanced up at Scarlett. Nothing. She's dead. Dead? What the hell? Why is she still at the desk? Maybe she had a condition, I offered. Call it in. I'll check for a medical bracelet or something. Scarlett nodded and retreated back a few steps to report to our supervisors. I made my way around the desk. There was nothing to show she had some sort of medical condition, but it wasn't long before I found the cause of her death. When I tilted her body forward, a bullet wound slowly oozed blood. It was a small hole, most likely a pistol caliber, and when I opened her shirt, I found the exit wound. Someone had cleaned it up, though. What the hell? I mumbled. I looked back at Scarlett, but she was still fiddling with her radio. When she saw me looking, she said, "Damn thing won't work. I'm just getting static. What's the deal with her?" "She's dead," I replied. Looks like someone knew what they were doing. They cleaned up the front of it, so... Then it clicked. We both came to it practically simultaneously. I vaulted over the desk, making for the door access to the long lobby, and as I did so, the metal safety grate began to slide down. Its gears ground loudly as it slowly began the process of cutting off our path to freedom. Scarlett had a head start, having already been on the other side of the desk, and she reached the door when the grate was still almost a foot off the ground. She pounded on the glass with her fist, but after that was unsuccessful, she slipped her gun out of her holster and fired it into the glass once, twice, 3 times. However, the bullets didn't penetrate. The glass was bulletproof. "Damn it," she mumbled, slamming the butt of her gun onto the glass. I caught up with her at that point and looked through the thin slit that had allowed the lights in through the grate. "What the hell's going on?" I breathed, shaking my head. "We're stuck in here," Scarlett said, and she looked around the lobby. For a moment, her words echoed faintly down the dark room, and we let it sink in, taking stock of our situation. Something was going on, something that someone was willing to kill to keep under wraps. Whoever it was very wealthy and very intelligent. They had not only known to jam the radio frequencies, but had the means of doing it, and they were either in possession of power at the company or commanded enough respect to lead enough people to establish this lockdown. I had narrowed it down to either the CEO or a head scientist, with the CEO being the more likely of the two, but this was all in the first minute of having this knowledge. "So what now?" Scarlett asked, sliding her gun back into her holster. "There's only one thing we can do. Find out what they're trying to hide." "Are you crazy? This was supposed to be a routine checkup. We're not equipped to get in a gunfight. For all we know, a terrorist cell could have taken this place hostage, and they're armed to the teeth." I nodded. Outside assailants were a situation I hadn't thought of. "Well, what else would we do?" I asked. "If we want to escape this place, our only way is into the looking glass." "I don't like that metaphor," Scarlett noted. "But yeah, I suppose you're right. And if we're going into the deadly genetic engineering lab, we might as well do our job," I finished. She nodded. "So much for Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez," she muttered as we began to walk to the hallway that would take us to the rest of the building. The lobby was set up so that the receptionist would be able to have seen anybody attempting to enter the complex. There was no furniture, not even a potted plant, just cold white tile and then the desk. Behind the desk were 2 doors, one on the left and one on the right, and we learned in the briefing that each led in a different direction. To the left was the business end of the headquarters, decisions, accounts, and computing occurrences. To the right was the science portion, laboratories, testing chambers. That took up the majority of the real estate there, and that was where we were heading. If an answer lay anywhere in this darkened house of death, we believed it would be there. So I took point, and we entered the looking glass. The lights were still out in the hallway, and it was nearly impossible to see. Scarlett pulled out her flashlight, the thin beam piercing through the darkness and lighting up a tiny area of the hall. It wasn't much, but it was better than pitch black. The suffocating darkness surrendered a little to help us piece together the mystery. For the most part, it was just a white, sterile hallway, without any form of decoration. Every so often, we'd see something that looked a little off. A dark smear on a wall, a fluorescent light casting that had been torn out of its original shell and smashed on the ground, but for the most part during the first hallway there was nothing. However, when we reached the end of it and arrived at a door, things began to ramp up. The door was the same material as the rest of the hallway, and had it not been cracked slightly open, it would have been highly likely that we wouldn't have even noticed it. Upon closer inspection, I saw that there was a thumbprint scanner on the right of it, and it must have utilized electronic locks, which would have gone out whenever the power did. "Do we go in?" Scarlett asked. "I mean, we're already gone this far," I replied. "What's the worst that can happen?" "Don't say that. You know that never ends well," she said. I rolled my eyes and pulled the door open further, allowing us to look in through the entryway. The room appeared to be a testing chamber for genetic engineering. About 10 feet in there was a glass wall with a heavily secured door in the center, leading to an airlock, and then to an area where the tests were performed. There was a table with straps on it, several cages in the corner, and then a chair with straps on it too. All were splattered in dark red. I groaned slightly at the sight, and then the smell hit me through the airlock. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I kneeled over as I tried not to retch. The smell was putrid, and I thought there was no way I was going to make it any further. I was about to say something when Scarlett beat me to it. "What's wrong?" she said, pointing her pistol around the room to check for danger. "Are you okay?" You don't smell that?" I said, tears in my eyes as I mercifully became adjusted to the smell. "God, it's rancid." "Smell what? It's just blood." "There's something else. There must be a body in here or something. It's starting to fade, but you're telling me you can't smell that at all?" "No," she muttered. "That's strange. Come on, let's see if we can find anything in here." I followed after her, figuring maybe the smell had dissipated by the time she got into the room, and not really seeing anything weird about it. The blood was dried, it looked like it had been there for days, and it covered virtually every surface. As I circled around, trying to find any semblance of a clue to what had happened, I spotted a camera in the top right corner. I was about to point it out to Scarlett when suddenly a noise from behind us caused us both to freeze. It was a scratching noise, like a small animal burrowing around. That was in the corner that we hadn't searched yet, of course, and it was obscured by the initial view by a small wall that cut off the glass viewing room, so we had no idea it was there. The scrabbling continued, noticeably muffled, and then there was an odd squish. The noise paused for a moment, and I slowly turned my head to lock eyes with Scarlett. The unspoken agreement was to turn and pump whatever was back there full of lead, and we held our breath for half a second. Then we whipped around the corner, firing round after round into it, the burst of light obscuring the dark corner from our view. After a few moments, I stopped, and she followed. I shined my flashlight into the corner and saw the bloodied, shredded, unrecognizable lump. Whatever had happened to it, it was long dead before we had gotten there. "What the hell made that noise?" she whispered. I didn't respond. We stood there in silence for a moment, neither of us wanting to be the one to volunteer to investigate the pulp. "Fine, I guess I'll do it," I finally relented, reluctantly returning my gun to my holster. "But you owe me one." She rolled her eyes, and I cautiously approached the lump that glistened sickeningly in the light of Scarlett's flashlight. Upon closer inspection, I could almost make out that it had been a human torso. However, it was destroyed. All the skin, at least the skin that would have been facing up, had been torn away, explaining the bloodied appearance. There was only one arm left, the left one, and it was tucked under the body until I pulled it out again. It was clenching something in its hand, a slip of paper it appeared, and I attempted to pry it loose. "Hurry up," Scarlett urged. "I think I heard something out in the hall." "That's just your imagination," I replied, tugging on the paper. It was wedged tightly, and the person must have had an iron grip. Then, just as the paper slid free, something burst out of its back. I stumbled backwards, crying out as the thing leapt at me. "What is it?" Scarlett exclaimed, her attention having been focused on the entrance to the hallway. As I recovered from my initial shock, I realized the tiny ball of fur was just that. Tiny. It looked like a rat, a decently sized one for sure, but there was something wrong with it. I didn't have much experience with rats, but the way it walked, the dull look in its dead little eyes, something was off. "You big baby," Scarlett teased, helping me up after she picked the rat off of me and tossed it into the corner. "What, you scared of a little rat?" "Something's wrong here," I said. "I don't like it." Scarlett glanced around at the carnage. "Really? You have a team of monkeys working around the clock on that one?" "The rat, it wasn't normal," I said, ignoring her sarcasm. "This place, why is it covered in blood? That was a human body. What happened to it?" Then I heard what Scarlett must have heard earlier. There was a sound of someone, or something, pounding on metal. 3 dull thuds, then a hollow groan permeated down the hallway. "Is that—" "Yeah," she returned in an equally low tone. "Whatever it is, it's between us and the exit." Wordlessly, I drew my gun again, nodding at the door, and we cautiously crept back towards the hallway. out of the testing chamber. As we left, the rat scurried off behind us, startling us a little. With that, we set off. The unspoken agreement seemed to be that if whatever had made that sound earlier did it again, we would be going to investigate. Chances are, we would be spending an undesirable amount of time with it anyway. I figured, why not get acquainted with it? Obviously, I wasn't keen on meeting the thing, and I only wanted to do it if the opportunity arose. I was kind of hoping internally that we wouldn't run across it. However, as it often does, my hopes were unfounded. Before we'd even reached the halfway point, a terrified shriek came from the door we had just passed. Then, before we could react, something slammed into the glass porthole at the top of the door. I jumped back, training my pistol on that 8-inch circle of glass as whatever it was dragged across the clear surface, smearing what looked like blood across it. I held a finger to my lips as Scarlett glanced at me, and she nodded. There was no movement for a moment, so I slowly approached the door and reached for the knob. Whatever was behind the door let out a mighty roar and then slammed its head into the window. I must have jumped a mile at the noise, and I quickly regained my wits, aiming my gun back at the small viewing port into the room. What I saw was disturbing, to say the least. Though it was pressed up against the glass and slightly distorted by it, I could tell it was human, or at least it had been at one point. It had stringy black hair that was matted down with blood that streaked across the glass as the creature pressed harder and harder against it, trying to break through. Its skin was a human shade, but it was stretched and waxy, looking as if it had been torn like paper. Then, there was its eyes. The emotion, or lack thereof, I'd seen in the beady eyes of that rat was amplified 100-fold in the eyes of this creature. There was nothing, 2 empty pits, devoid of color and life, entirely black. There was no iris, no white. It was just pitch. As it continued pounding on the door, much to our horror, several more groans and thuds began emanating from all around the hallway. There were more of those creatures, all throughout the hallway, and worse, not all the doors were locked. "Come on," I shouted over the din. "We gotta go." We began running down towards the lobby. Hands groped out at us through the darkness, one of them even flailing as it attempted to body check me, but no serious threat was proposed at us until we were 10 feet from the exit. One of the doors flung open at that moment, and I ran directly into it. I was momentarily stunned as it knocked me off my feet. My gun fell out of my hand, skittering off into the darkness. I heard Scarlett utter a curse as she was about to start shooting at the thing, when suddenly, one of them grabbed me from behind. I shouted for help, still disoriented, trying to attack the creature that was grabbing me. She whipped her head around, and in a moment of distraction, one of them had opened the door and took hold of her. She slammed her elbow into its guts and prepared to duck under the grasp provided by its reaction, but it had none. Instead, it reared its head back and sunk its teeth into her upper arm, tearing at it aggressively. She cried out in pain. Meanwhile, I was just hardly avoiding a similar fate. I'd managed to get a position of leverage on the head of the creature, but it was strong and untiring. I could feel my strength giving way when suddenly I heard the door burst open ahead of me. Initially, I thought it was more of the creatures emerging to snuff out the last remaining bits of fire in us. I thought that was the end, and I closed my eyes, lessening my hold on the creature's head. Then, instead of jaws and death, I heard a dull clunk and felt the weight lifted off me. I opened my eyes to see that the creature had been sent stumbling backwards, a series of dents in the center of its face. Get up! Get up!" a voice shouted, a figure appearing in my vision, extending a hand to help me. "Come on, we gotta go." I accepted his help, and the first thing I noticed when I got to my feet was he was wearing a surgical mask. Then I noticed that he was carrying a crowbar. Seeing my confused look, he said, "I'll explain later. We gotta get out of here." "Wait," I protested. Scarlett was still struggling feebly against the creature that had bit her in the arm, and I rushed over to her, grabbing onto the creature's head and prying apart its teeth. "Go, go," I hissed to Scarlett. Free from the thing's maw, she made for the exit immediately, and I followed not too long after, once I had stunned the creature sufficiently that it wouldn't follow us directly. However, during that time, the way to the exit slowly began to close as more of the creatures pressed in. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I sprinted forward, bowling over 2 of them, and when one lunged out at me, I grabbed his wrist in a hold I knew so well I had practiced automatically and snapped the flimsy bones. Then I dove for the exit, tucking my body into a roll as I passed through the opening. When I did so, our masked savior slammed the door shut behind me, sliding in several deadbolts I hadn't noticed before. They seemed hastily installed, and I guess they hadn't been there until, Well, until those creatures were. Breathing heavily, I slowly made my way back to my feet. Scarlet was sitting against the reception desk, clutching her arm as it oozed steadily. The men in the mask finished locking up, and then turned back to face me. "What the hell is going on here?" I panted. "I suppose you're with the FBI," he remarked. "I'll explain everything, don't worry." "Well, perhaps you should be worried, but for different reasons." "Yeah," I said, sucking in air. "Clearly. You're going to want to come with me. I could explain everything here, but trust me, it'll be much easier if we can get everyone together." The walk to the rooms they'd established as their base was a strange one. The building seemed so normal. It just looked like an after-hours office building. I'd judged by this time that night had come on the first day. Most of the rooms looked undisturbed, as if someone could step right in and get right to work. However, the deeper we got into the business section of the building, the less and less likely that became. At first, it was just the little things. A desk would be upturned, blocking the door, or a potted plant had been knocked over, spilling the dirt across the carpet. But then it took on a darker turn. Occasionally, dark blood would be smeared in gory streaks across the wall, or a corpse would lie unattended on the ground. Windows were shattered, the carpet was torn up, the wall fixtures lay in shambles on the floor. Little things, little aesthetic touches. Then we entered the final hallway. At the end of the hallway, there was a sealed door that led to an elevator. From the blueprints I'd studied, I knew it led to the higher corporate offices. But we didn't go that way. Instead, we entered the conference room in the middle of the hallway. When he opened the door, he looked back at us, seemingly in thought for a moment. "You'd had better wait out here. Just a precaution. Don't worry. They've never made it this far. I'll come and get you in just a minute." "Glad to see you're rolling out the welcome wagon," I said, but he'd already entered the room. I helped Scarlet sit down and slid to the floor myself, not before taking a peek into the conference room, though. It was a dismal sight to behold. There were about 20 people in there, all in various stages of grief or despair. Some huddled in groups, others sat alone. Still others sat at the table, tending to the 4 wounded people who lay bleeding in the large conference table. Some of the people wore surgical masks, though most didn't. The man who'd saved us was in deep conversation with 3 of the 4 others, standing close to the entrance, away from the others. I glanced over at Scarlet and saw through the darkness that she was crying. I thought better of making small talk, and we waited in silence for about a half a minute. Then she was the one to break it. "We're in over our heads. We have to find a way to contact someone. They have to come and find us. I'll talk to this guy, but we can't get hysterical. We need to keep our wits about us. We knew this was a possibility. Well, not this, but something of this magnitude. We're prepared. We can handle this." "What makes you think we can handle this? What have you ever gone through in life that makes you assume you can handle this?" At that moment, though, the door swung open, and the man who'd let us in emerged. I was grateful for the distraction, since I truly had no answers. "All right," he said, "I owe you an explanation. My name is Jace Morrison. I was the director of product management with Ryon. Since there's quite a bit to cover, I'll open it to you from the very beginning. What do you want to know?" I looked over at Scarlet, but she had already begun to ask, "What the hell were those things? Did they have to do with the genetic engineering that was going on here?" Yes, they do," he sighed. "They were the product of what we're calling IM01 disease. Those things, they used to be human. And to your second question, yes, it does have to do with genetic engineering. We're still not entirely sure how, but it's believed that one of the test subjects had an undiscovered dormant genetic trait that was set off by the experiments. That trait reacted negatively to testing, producing IM01. I'm sure it could be explained better, but the people you just met are in the best position to explain it to you." "So you were experimenting on humans?" Scarlet asked. "This is worse than I thought." "What is IM01? How does it spread? What are the effects?" I asked, signifying that he didn't have to answer that rhetorical question. IM01 is an airborne disease. However, it dies very quickly unless it finds a host. If it does so, it slowly begins to take over the host's body until it has gained complete control, at which point it rewrites the brain to amplify aggression, delete pain receptors, and reduce logical thought. The process generally takes about 12 hours. At least, that's what we've seen. And visible signs that the host is infected will not begin to show until approximately the 10-hour mark. "Can it be transferred once the host is converted?" I asked, nervous that it could have been transferred during the scuffle with the creatures. "There's only been one instance of it, and it was after the creature had reached full maturity, which takes about 24 hours after the transformation is complete. At that point, the disease becomes fortified, being able to survive indefinitely outside the host. and is present in the creature's very breath. I looked at Scarlet and saw that she'd reached the same conclusion I had. "You knew about this, then?" she asked accusingly. "You know too much about it. You knew about the consequences, but, if I may guess, you chose to test the creatures and the disease instead of reporting it. Then an outbreak happened, and now you're here." "Yes, but I assure you, the decision was entirely Mr. Rowan's himself. I'm sure you're also curious about the radio blackouts, security gates, and the unfortunate death of Miss Naomi West. That was all a result of the paranoid CEO, Andrew Rian. He was the one that ordered the genetic research in the first place. And when he did so, he installed several measures that would ensure the headquarters could become entirely self-sustained in the event that such an event did occur. He had since separated himself from us. He locked himself in the corporate suites, where he just so happens to have full control over all the security measures, at least the ones he can power with the backup generator. However, before he or those loyal to him retreated, he knew that he was going to have to deal with the inspectors, such as yourself. So he shot Naomi. He cleaned up the wound and propped her up in the chair so that you would approach, giving him sufficient time to activate the security gate and the frequency jammer. He's entirely delusional. His goal is to wait out the death of every single living thing in the building, and then to continue with operations as normal. There is nothing we can do. We cannot put our lives above that of the entirety of humanity's, as if we were to make an escape attempt, the risk would be too great that the IMM-01 would follow us, and I'm sure I don't need to explain the consequences of that. We've managed to secure all the creatures we know of in the experimental hallway. There are certainly a few that continue to roam unabated. Now, we currently don't have a method of determining if a subject is or isn't infected, so if you two would spend the night in another office, perhaps? "Oh, sure, of course," I said. "I mean, is there anything you can do about her arm? I think the bleeding stopped, but an infection would probably be deadly." He held his breath helplessly. "We have no medical supplies. If you've already stopped the bleeding, that's about as much as can be done." Scarlet nodded grimly, and without another word, he left, returning to the conference room. She looked over to me as the doors closed. "You still think we're ready for this?" "It's worse than we thought," I said, repeating her sentiment from earlier. "You know how we're going to get out of here, though, right?" she asked. I grinned weakly, looking down the hall at the sealed metal door. "I sure do." Despite her pessimism, she had retained that calculating mind that helped her so much during training, and we remained on the same page. "Come on, help me up," she said. "I'm not sleeping out here. Let's find a nice office or something." The information having lifted our spirits, if only slightly, I lifted her up and walked her around for a few minutes before finding a suitable office. Then, as I helped her to lie down on a rather plush couch, she paused, looking curiously into my eyes. "What?" Then the curiosity turned to fear. "Give me your flashlight," she ordered. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Just give it to me," she exclaimed, and I hastily retrieved it, handing it over to her. She clicked it on, then shone it into my eyes. "Gah!" I exclaimed, shielding my eyes as the sudden burst of light blinded me. "What's that for? Put that thing away." "Show me your eyes," she demanded, and I opened them, squinting into the harsh light. "Dexter, your eyes," she trailed off. "What's wrong with my eyes? What's going on?" "They're black," she replied. "What do you—" I began, and then the realization hit me. Scarlet slowly propped herself up on her good arm and inched back away from me. "Stay back," she said, a look of fear in her eyes. "What? I'm not a—" I replied, trailing off. I slowly backed away from her, touching the skin on my face. It might have just been my imagination, but it almost felt waxy, like the skin of the creature. What's happening to me? What's going on? Jace said it takes 12 hours to convert, didn't he? "You'll be fine until then," she said, but her voice wasn't very convincing. Even less convincing was the hand that slowly made its way down to her hip, where it rested against the butt of her gun. I'll go get him and let him know." I nodded, pacing back and forth nervously. I didn't feel any different, as I would have expected someone suffering from a mind-altering virus to feel. The only thing was the paranoia that now set in. Would the creature still attack me? Or would they accept me as one of their own? The darkness was suffocating. It surrounded me, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. I was disoriented and panicking. What could I do? What was there to do? If I allowed myself to become one of those creatures, would I kill Scarlet? The seconds until she was back with Jace felt like hours, but she finally came back and explained the situation. Well, he's definitely not contagious, so you don't have to worry about being near him, at least for now. But there's not much else I can do to put a positive spin on this. We have no idea what a cure might look like, and even if we did, there'd be no way to make it unless we somehow had all the ingredients here in this building. God, how could I have forgotten about the eyes? When did I get it, I asked. How come Scarlet doesn't have it? Did you ever smell something really pungent? Something that smelled so bad it almost made you throw up? Jace returned my question with one of his own. Probably around the testing chamber, if you'd gone that far. Yeah, I said, recalling the smell, right when we walked in. It faded after a bit, though. What happened? That was it. The virus has a distinct smell, and once you smell it, there's some time to escape, but if you adjust to the smell, then by that time it's already gotten inside you. But how come Scarlet didn't get it? Did all the virus go into me? Jace glanced at Scarlet without saying anything. Then he gasped, Wait, did you smell it? No way, she replied. Jace leapt up in the air with a shout, pumping his fist. Thank Jesus, there's hope. What? What is it? Scarlet asked. You're immune, he replied, grabbing her by the shoulders. When the scientists were testing it, they of course accounted for immunity. They said something about how the scent of the virus was impactful, that an early sign of immunity might be an inability to sense it. Him getting affected while you didn't. It seems highly likely that you have some kind of immunity. Really? That's incredible, she said. Can we use it to help Dexter? Jace let out a long exhale. There may be a way. It'll be hard, and if it were just for you, I wouldn't do it. So generous, Scarlet muttered. That sounds harsh, I know, but it involves us taking back the corporate office, and that means getting out. What's in the corporate office, I asked. The head scientist. She wasn't in with Rion, not completely, but Rion took her by force in the event that a scientist was needed. Her name is Julia Russell. She has access to the early tests of the cure. None of them were successful, but given the proper antibodies, I was told they could have worked. So the antibodies might be in my blood, Scarlet asked. Exactly, but we're working against the clock here. We've got 8, maybe 9 hours, and then it'll be too late. The cure won't work once Dex has already turned. Don't suppose you have a plan, do you? I asked, and for the first time a smile crept across my face. I was hoping you'd ask, Jace said. March 21st. The plan was relatively simple, in theory at least. Scarlet and I would crawl into the upper floors through the ceiling. Then I'd search for the scientist, and she'd activate the elevator, allowing reinforcements to follow in case something went amiss. Once we had the scientist, he'd aid us with the serum, and after adding Scarlet's blood, I'd be cured. Then we could make contact with the FBI, and hopefully make it out of this wretched place. We spent the last half hour or so going over the plan, as blueprints of all the floors and the ventilation systems were accessible from the office we had access to. Now, we're just getting ready to go. How does it feel? Scarlet asked as we set out from the office, beneath the floor tiles we'd eventually climb through. I don't know. It's almost normal, but sometimes I feel something inside of me. It might be me thinking about it too much, but it feels like it's rising up. And if I don't push it down, it'll take over. She nodded, not replying verbally. I had begun to relax about it. I knew I was on the verge of getting the cure, and not a lot could go wrong at this point. Jace had told us that Rion's pistol was the only weapon up there, and one man with a pistol would be no match for us. We'd been trained numerous times on specific scenarios, and knowing the exact floor plan certainly wouldn't hurt our chances. It was about 5 minutes before Jace came through again. He knocked on the door as he entered and said, "We're ready when you are. How are you holding up?" I knew the question was directed at me. Well, I haven't felt hungry for human flesh yet. Other than that, I'm perfectly fine. I saw the corner of his mouth turn up in the darkness. It's good to keep your humor. It helps retain your humanity. Well, you're good to go whenever. You know the way, after all. And with that, he returned to wait with the team he'd selected to aid us in our mission. He wasn't one to mince words. He said what needed to be said and nothing more. I'd only known him for a day, but even I could tell that. I pushed myself off the table I'd been leaning against and said, "We might as well get going. There's no time like the present." Scarlet was equally ready, at least externally. "Agreed," she replied, and we began the cumbersome process of entering the ventilation shaft above our heads. A ladder had been produced from the supply closet, but the hardest part wasn't getting in. It would be distributing our weight sufficiently so that we didn't collapse half the system simply by hanging for a minute too long. It took 2 of us 5 minutes to get up, but we did so without disaster, and then the doubly cumbersome process of slowly shuffling our way through the cramped metal space was underway. We'd memorized the directions to get there, but there was still the possibility of missing a turn or forgetting a drop just ahead, so we crawled in utter silence, focused entirely on the task at hand. I was brimming with confidence as we neared the final destination. The final trial we had to surmount before entering the upper floor was a difficult one. A 20-foot vertical shaft that we would have to climb using nothing but the force of our friction. I arrived at the wall earlier than I'd expected, my hands brushing against the black wall a few steps before I'd anticipated. "We're here," I hissed, back to Scarlet to avoid unwanted collisions. "All right," she whispered. "Don't fall on me. It would be a shame to have survived a zombie attack only to be killed by my clumsy partner." "Whatever," I said, rolling my eyes in the darkness as a smile spread across my face. I felt the air above my head to make sure I wasn't going to bump into anything, and stood. For a moment, I just stretched my legs, readjusting to standing, and then I prepared for the ascent. I considered for a moment sticking my flashlight in my mouth, just to provide some sense of security, but decided there was no need. Like the rest of the vents, I had the vertical shaft entirely memorized. I positioned my hands on either side of my body, pressing them against the walls of the shaft as I tested its give. When I was ready, I pushed off, lifting my feet off the ground and beginning to climb. It was a strenuous effort, inching my way up, minute by grueling minute. By the time I was halfway up, my arms and my legs, my torso, they all ached. But I didn't falter. I knew a lot rode on my shoulders, but I also knew I was more than up to the task. As I remained calm and collective, I shuffled my way up into the upper echelons of the building. 20 feet may not seem terribly high, but using the method of travel I was using, it took a considerable amount of time to traverse the distance, and the clacking sound of the ventilation system shifting around made it feel longer. But I did reach the top. When my hands finally felt the ledge, I let out a sigh of relief. Confident as I had been, there was always a chance that something could go horribly wrong, and I was glad that it hadn't. Then, of course, it did. A shriek like the one from the testing room emitted in the darkness, and a hand soon followed. It latched onto my hand, attempting to pry my grip from the ledge, and it nearly succeeded. However, I managed to grab on with my other hand at the last minute, saving myself and Scarlet from a very painful drop. "What is it?" Scarlet called as I grunted, struggling to pull myself up before the creature could impede my progress further. Unwilling to spare effort for response, I quickly lowered myself a small amount, then instantly pulled back up, using the excess momentum to knock the creature's legs out from under it. The gamble worked, and the thing slammed its head into the metal vent, stunning it momentarily. I used the temporary break to jump to my feet and call back down. "There's a creature up here! Hurry!" The vent was taller up here. I was able to stand, but just barely. It was still dark, but I could make out several forms further down the vent. "Come on, there's more of them!" I picked the stunned creature up off the ground and slammed its head into the wall before planting a foot on its back and sending it sprawling towards the others, then extending a hand to help Scarlet up. "What's going on? Why are they here?" "I don't know, but it can't be good. Let's deal with them first, then we'll think about it." She nodded, and we ran forward into the group. There were 5 of them, including the battered one I'd dealt with, and Scarlet immediately sent a spinning kick into one of them, sending it tumbling to the metal floor. I stepped on in and leapt forward, sending a punch at the throat of a second. I made contact and prepared to duck another return swing, but it never came. Instead, it turned to go after Scarlet. Without hesitation, I tackled it, slamming it into the wall, but it didn't seem to make an effort to retaliate, simply struggling against my hold and continuing after Scarlet. She was busy dumping 2 creatures over the edge. "They're not going after me," I called to her, the reason why slowly dawning on me. I bent down, picking up the creature, and hurled it over my head in the direction of the ledge. It landed hard on the floor, as I wasn't strong enough to clear the ledge, but its momentum carried it the rest of the way. "They must sense I have the virus in me. They're completely ignoring me." "Lucky you," Scarlet muttered, as the 2 remaining creatures advanced on her. "Give me a hand with these 2, would you?" I jumped into action, launching a spinning back fist at the one that was nearest me. The blow glanced off its head with little damage, but it stumbled to the side, and I gave a mighty push as it was off balance, knocking it into the other one. The second one I was pushing over the ledge, but the first managed to barely keep its balance, teetering on the brink of the abyss. Scarlet finished the job, planting a kick heavily into its chest, and watched as it disappeared into the darkness. We quickly began to make our way to the vent we'd be making our entrance through. And as we walked, Scarlet asked, Does that mean you're making the transition? I don't know. If not, I'm probably getting close. We'd better hurry. We ran the rest of the way, and when we made it to the vent, I quickly pried it open and lowered myself through. It struck me immediately as odd that the lights were out. It was dark as it had been in the lower levels. When Scarlet lowered herself down beside me, she noticed the same thing. This isn't good. You don't think the creatures could have... How would the virus have gotten up here, I asked, knowing the question she was going to ask. Unless the scientists or someone in the lab area. The thought faded unfinished into the darkness. Let's get this over with, Scarlet said. I began to wish I had some form of communication with her, or anyone to be honest, but it was impossible with the radio blockage. Before I could think twice about it, though, she was gone, and I was alone in the dark hallway. I touched the wall to get my bearings and set off for the main office where Jace believed the scientists were being held. I walked quietly, willing to accept the delay to avoid a large delay if someone or something heard me. Everything was empty. There was no sign of life anywhere, nor were there any signs of death we'd seen downstairs. It was just empty. I hurried through the halls, unwilling to test fate after our experience in the vents, and after some time, I arrived at the innermost office, that of Andrew Rion. The entrance was lavish, consisting of 2 massive wooden doors, a traditional entryway with a very modern security, and what I assumed to be a retinal scanner to the right of the door in evidence. The doors were at the end of a long hallway. Even through the darkness, though, I could tell that something was wrong. It was pretty easy to see that they were wide open. That wasn't a good sign. I guessed that there had been an outbreak, and as opposed to seeking out the creatures, the survivors had made their last stand in Rion's office. They evidently hadn't fared too terribly well. I cautiously approached the once luxurious office, and as I did so, the feeling of lurking evil within me rose, stronger than it had ever been. It knocked me to my knees, and I felt dizzy as I attempted to suppress it. I fought hard, making my way to my feet, as I knew there was quite a bit riding on me. As I examined the surroundings, fighting the feeling that my head was swimming, I realized that the office, perhaps, wasn't the best word to describe Rion's workspace. It seemed like a headquarters in of itself, as the room I was looking into was more like a lobby. I could see 4 hallways branching out from where I stood, which I had seen in the blueprints, but it was very different now that I was looking at them. All of this, just for one man. A mental picture of him was beginning to form, and it wasn't someone I thought I could get along with very well. Regardless, I followed Jace's instructions down the middle hallway. This also happened to be where the multiple blood trails seemed to be leading. I was about 10 steps down the hallway when I heard the first clunk. It came from somewhere ahead, and I froze, but nothing followed it. I knew I could do nothing but push on and hopefully be prepared for whatever arrived. There were several doors on either side of me, but I ignored them. Not only were they utterly empty, but my goal was in the deepest parts of the office. Jace had assumed, apparently correctly, that they would have tried to put as much space between themselves and the initial outbreak as possible, and that they would be tucked away in the deepest recesses of his office. When I finally did come across it, unlike the rest of the offices, it wasn't very luxurious. Just 2 plain doors. There were several corpses scattered about, but I knew I was running out of time, so I didn't waste any of it on them. I tried the handle, and it was unlocked, but when I pushed, the door wouldn't budge. I paused for a moment, considering my options, then I stepped back, ready to kick it down. However, before I could, one of the doors flung open, revealing a woman in a tattered white lab coat who was pointing a gun at me. "Who the hell are you, and why didn't they attack you?" she asked. "What? I'm an FBI agent. Before I could finish my explanation, a massive surge of darkness rose up, nearly blotting out my vision. I once again fell over, but this time I couldn't stand up. "You're infected, aren't you?" she said, brandishing the gun at me. "I don't have the cure. I wish I did, but the formula is incomplete. If I had the cure, do you think we'd still all be here right now?" "Don't shoot," I groaned. We have the missing piece. My partner, she's immune. Go inside. Get a dose ready. She'll be here any minute." The virus racked my body, and I began to convulse violently. Then, my rational brain lost control. I remember vague images from that time. The scientist slamming the door shut. I imagine she barricaded them after, then various flashes of hallway, and the other creatures as I wandered around the darkened floor. I didn't go too far from where I'd left, and the next thing I remember was Scarlet running down the hallway. The creature that I had become joined the crowd that followed her, and she fired several times at us, one of her bullets clipping me on the leg. Thankfully, it incapacitated me. Otherwise, I might have persisted, and something bad could have happened to one of us. The creature crawled for some time, but I eventually gave up. The next thing I remember was the lights turning on. The creature must have an aversion to light, because it felt incredibly painful. The creature cowered there on the carpet. Then with a jolt, I returned to consciousness. Gah! I shouted, sitting bolt upright as a sharp pain in my arm brought me back to reality. The events of the day quickly coming back to me. I looked down at my hands and saw that the gray was quickly fading. That's when I felt my cheeks, and the skin was warm and smooth. I looked around, Scarlet smiling, seeing the color returning to my eyes. It's over. We made it. Thank God. I was getting a little worried there for a minute, I groaned. What the hell happened? They had shut down the power. I couldn't activate the elevator, so I decided to come back to you. But when I got here, it was just Dr. Russell. She explained what had happened with you, so she took some of my blood and got the cure ready. But then there was the matter of finding you, and in the dark, with who knows how many other creatures out there, it took a lot to find you. So we fought our way to the control room, turned the power back on, and while we were at it, we disabled the frequency jammer on the radios for backup. And from there, it was only a matter of time before we found you. As circulation returned to my body, I made my way to my feet with the help of Scarlet. Alright, so what happened up there? Why were the creatures here, and how did they get in the vents? The virus is respiratory, something I tried to explain to Dr. Rion, but he refused to acknowledge it. Dr. Russell stepped in. As soon as the first ventilation cycle started, it made its way from down there to up here. Several of them began to transform. I barricaded myself in the inner office with doses of the cure ready. I mean, I really didn't have much else to do other than wait, and that's what I did. So where's Rion now? Scarlet asked. He's gonna have to answer for all this. I don't know, Dr. Russell shrugged. I haven't seen him since the outbreak up here began, so he most likely got infected and turned into one of those, she said, gesturing to the corpses either dead or cowering from the fluorescent lights. I suppose that's fitting, I said with a shrug, destroyed by the very thing that you inadvertently created. Guess so, Scarlet nodded. So, how far out is backup? I asked. I can't be the only one getting sick of walking on carpeted floors. They should be getting here any minute. Advanced teams are getting flown in, and it sounds like Clay is with one of them. Clay? What does she want? I asked. Don't let her hear you talking like that. She's still our superior. But my guess would be that we're both in line for a promotion. The thought was comforting, a sensation that felt almost unfamiliar after the past day, and the minutes until they arrived flew by. The helicopters landed on the roof, and agents in hazmat suits entered through the rooftop entrance. Once we explained that we'd been cured, and that the airborne form of the virus would most likely remain dormant for several more hours until the creatures up there reached maturity, Scarlet helped me up the ladder and several medics attended to the bullet in my leg. It was such a flurry of activity, agents hurrying around and scientists yelling at them to be more careful, but I had been put on some minor painkillers as the medics fixed my leg, so I was oblivious to most of it. Once things started to settle down, Scarlet came over to sit by me. They're going to burn it to the ground, she said. They talked to Jace, since it seems like the company's going to him, and he thinks that it's the best thing to do. There's no board or anything. Rion owned the entirety of the company, so it's all up to him now. That's good, I replied. He deserves it. I'd only known him for that day, but if that was how he handled an outbreak of zombie virus, running a company should be light work for him. Well, that's mission number 1 in the books. I have to say that it's not my definition of routine. I might check out the benefits we got from that, she mused. Early retirement is a serious option for me. I laughed, but quickly regained my composure as a woman approached us. I recognized her immediately as Carmen Clay, and when I did my best attempt at snapping to attention, she held up a hand. At ease, Agent. You've done enough today. Thanks, ma'am, I replied. Well, if my ears are correct, I heard the words retirement getting tossed around here, she said, turning to Scarlet. I do hope a little mission like that won't be enough to scare off a fantastic pairing like you. I was just joking, ma'am, Scarlet replied. Although, I wouldn't say no to some time off. Of course, Clay nodded. In all seriousness, this was an incredibly strenuous, dangerous, and difficult mission. I could name a dozen veterans here who wouldn't be able to handle it, and I want you both to know how proud I am of your efforts. Thank you, Scarlet said. Also, I want to let you know what the scientists calculated. If you hadn't contacted us, there was an 87% chance that the virus would have made it out of the building. and from there, a 63% chance that it would have survived the first day. If it survived that first day, it would have become airborne, and in that scenario, there would be a 3% chance that we would be able to stop it. The world is in your debt, though they may never know it. My jaw dropped at the numbers. That's bad, ma'am. I'm glad we were able to do our job. So are we all. You two, you make an excellent team. You remind me a lot of myself and my former partner. I think you're going to have great careers with the Bureau. Thank you, said Scarlet. That means a lot, ma'am. Well, you'd best be leaving now, Clay told us. I'm giving both of you paid time off. Go somewhere nice. Enjoy yourselves. We assured her we would, and Scarlet helped me into the waiting helicopter. As we flew off towards the nearby base, the sun was just beginning to rise in the east. To those who have never experienced a sunrise from a helicopter, I must recommend it. It's beautiful. And with that, my first mission with the Supernatural Division of the FBI came to a close. It was my first, but it certainly would not be my last.